Good afternoon. My name is Susanne Oberhauser, and I'm the head of the European Parliament office in London. We're committed to support and foster dialogue between the European Parliament and the UK Parliament, which today is no less important than it ever was. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this latest event in our series of webinars of bringing together senior members of the European Parliament and their counterparts in the UK Parliament, complemented by expertise from academia and think tank. Today, we have with us the chair of the European Parliament Committee on International Trade and member of the UK Coordination Group in the European Parliament, Bernd Lange, and his counterpart from the House of Commons, the chair of the Trade Committee, International Trade Committee, Angus McNeil. They are joined today by Dr. Meredith Crowley, an eminent researcher on international trade of the University in Cambridge. Our moderator today will be Georgina Wright from the Institute for Government, and she focuses there extensively on UK engagement and influence in the EU after Brexit. And I'm sure Georgina will steer us through the discussion today on the many issues and subjects at hand: deal or no deal, comprehensive agreement or a basic deal, the role of the two parliaments in the negotiations, but also in the face of the implementation of agreements, the implication a no deal would have on Northern Ireland, and for that matter, also the impact a no deal would have on the broader political cooperation between the UK and the EU. And we could also look forward a bit more to the possible EU-UK cooperation to foster global fair and free trade. So the list goes on. Questions, there are plenty at this very crucial stage of the negotiations, where we will have next week the decisive round of negotiations just after the visit of Michel Barnier here in London this week. So thank you very much, all of you, for attending here. Thank you very much to our speaker, to our moderator, and I wish us all interesting, fruitful, and engaging discussions. And with that, I will hand over to Georgina to conduct us through the further proceedings. Thank you very much.
Hello and welcome. I'm Georgina Wright. I'm a senior researcher at the Institute for Government. Thank you, Suzanne, for that introduction. I'm really delighted to be chairing this distinguished panel where we will be discussing the future of UK-EU trade relations and the role of both parliaments in those discussions. We will also try, I think, and take a step back and see how this all fits in within the broader changing trade landscape. My thanks to the European Parliament Office for organising this timely event. Before we start, I'll just begin with some housekeeping rules. First, as you know, this event is held on the record and it is being live streamed. There will be a recording after the event. So if you have to leave early, don't worry, you'll be able to catch the end. The conversation will last around an hour and 30 minutes, and there will be plenty of time for questions and answers. And as Susanne was saying, there's a lot of ground to cover. If you have a question, please do put your question in the chat box. We have excellent Q&A monitors at hand who will make sure I do see your question, and I will do my best to ask them. If you could give your affiliation, that would be great. It's always nice for our panelists to know where the question is coming from. Right, I think that's all. So I'm going to turn to our speakers now. But maybe I could start with you. The negotiations are going, but they don't appear to be going very well. We know we have a fresh round of negotiations on Monday. Some of your colleagues in the European Parliament have indicated that this is a crucial round, and Suzanne just said it would be a decisive round that will have bearing on what comes next. Is this right?
That's really right. So first of all, welcome to everybody. But you're quite right. This is a crucial negotiation round because it's totally clear the clock is ticking. We'll have time until the end of October. Then the text has to be ready. And this is not a simple text. Comprehensive trade agreement has a volume about 500 pages. And this has to be legal scrapped and translated and so on. And then, of course, scrutinized by the European Parliament. And this needs also time. So therefore, it's totally clear if there will be a deal, this has to be done until the 31st of October at least. And therefore, we need some really progress in this negotiation round because until now, there is just really little progress. And in the main areas, there's nothing. And normally in trade negotiation, step by step, time by time, we have so-called consolidated text where we merge the proposals from both sides in one text. And this exercise is not there at the moment. So we have just 1 month's time to do all this really important work. And therefore, more or less, the decision on the future of the trade relations is taken next week.
Great, thank you very much. You talked about some of the process and obviously some of the key sticking points. I know the resolution you published, I think it was in June, called for a comprehensive deal. But even the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, when she was during her visit, I think in London back at the beginning of the year, acknowledged that actually there was limited time to reach a comprehensive deal and that both sides would need to prioritise what is in that deal. So what, in your view, would be the very minimum that the European Parliament would expect to see in the deal to approve it?
Irina, this is not a question of minimum or maximum. This is a question of the political will to fulfill the obligation both sides, United Kingdom, government and the European Union, agreed in the political declaration of 2019. This declaration is available on the website in all language of the European Union, even in English. Everybody can read it. And in this political declaration, so it's not the European position, it's the common position of both sides. A lot of items we took over in the EP resolution are agreed. So the question of a level playing field so that there will be no dumping possibilities on both sides, or the question of no tariffs, no quotas, or the question of accepting consumer protection standards for foodstuff, the SPS regulations. It's all in this political declaration. Or, for example, the question of access for public procurement. It's a quite interesting element of the of common interest, where the UK government at the moment is not willing to go ahead in this question, even they signed this political declaration. And I can mention a lot of examples on that. So we want to have a deal based on this political declaration. And of course, there are some room for negotiations, for sure. Also, for example, the rules of origin. Is it necessary to have a value added in a country of 40% or 45%? That is a point of discussion. But the principles laid down in this political declaration should be not on the bazaar of bargaining. This is our common basis.
Great, and I'm really hoping we'll come back to some of those technical points as well, particularly around the room for compromise. And I know our other panelists will have views on this as well. Just before I turn to Angus, in coming back then looking at sort of taking stock of all these points that remain to be negotiated and agreed on, what if there is no negotiation progress next week? What happens, in your view?
Yeah, it's totally clear. If there's no progress, then at one point we have to decide that we will go ahead with the United Kingdom as a normal third country. That's for sure. And this is not a catastrophe. That's also clear. So we have a lot of very good relations to countries which are not part of a trade deal. So with the United States, for example, we have a big trading volume day by day, and we have no comprehensive trade deal with the United States. Even I tried and spent a lot of lifetime in the TTIP negotiation on that, but without any success. But there will be some practical arrangement. Even with the United States, we have 35 small agreements on practical arrangements on recognition of certification, product-specific regulations, and so on.
That was very exciting. I'm not sure where that came from, but sorry about that. Maybe someone from the US dialing in and picking you up on trying to make the most of that window of opportunity. No deal and how we can manage that is definitely something I will want to come back to later on in the discussion. And a reminder to our audience, if you've got questions or some of the comments trigger any further questions or comments, please do feed them in the comment box. Angus, maybe I could turn to you now. The government has obviously made clear that it is seeking a looser trading arrangement than was originally set out in the political declaration. How do you see the negotiations going?
I mean, they're clearly not going very well at the moment, and I think something to bear in mind are the numbers here. I mean, Brexit's costing the UK somewhere between 4.9 to upwards beyond 6% of GDP. And I don't think that's quite really hit home with the UK side. I think there's a lot of inexperience. There's a lot of it'll be all right in the night. There's also the political pressure of keeping the disparate forces of Brexit together. We can remember that people voted for Brexit on a variety of things, and they were deliberately vague and detailed to keep the coalition together. And of course, it squeezed home at the end of the day with 51%. So there's not great progress we can see at the moment. There's a reluctance, according to Michel Barnier, to engage and adjust, and it doesn't look great. And the choices seem to be at the moment between a hard Brexit and no deal Brexit. Either way, it's going to be costing, as I said, about probably 4.9% of GDP upwards. And to put that in some sort of context, there's a lot of talk in the UK at the moment of free trade agreements. Now, a free trade agreement, for instance, with the United States of America would yield about 0.16% of GDP, maybe as far as 0.2% of GDP, but roughly about a 30th of the damage of Brexit. And America, remember, is a quarter of the world's GDP. So the UK is going to find itself in a bit of a difficult bind. And I know there's GDP hits from COVID at the moment, but they're going to be different visually and politically to the hits that are probably going to come from Brexit. If we leave with no deal or even a hard deal that's demanding border checks and shelves on shops. So we've already had the toilet paper fiasco across Europe, but we could have that in a load of other areas in the UK. And if that happens, the political pressure of the lorries queuing and the shelves empty leaves for very uncertain waters for the UK government. And it's an uncertainty that they're bringing on themselves by, I think, an idealized version of history. And, I think at one time they thought, or a misunderstanding of trade, or some even wanted, there was some desire to go to WTO and trade at that level, which is the reason for trade blocks and the reason for free trade agreements is to get away from WTO. Therefore, in other words, WTO is the worst you can be at. But there are some Brexiteers who think that's a good idea, such as the inexperience about what Brexit and what trade actually means. So it's not great at the moment. To sort of bring a conclusion into this, certainly uncharted waters. There's a disbelief, even amongst Brexiteers that I know personally, in Scotland. There are not as many of them in Scotland per capita as there are in other places in the UK, that anything can possibly change at borders, and there might be quite a rude awakening coming up if lorries are slowed going backwards and forwards, and if industry and business is handicapped as a result of those inevitable changes that are put onto third countries that choose to trade at WTO. So what can we do? Short of looking for rosary beads, I think we just have to hope that we go, I can't believe I'm about to say this, we end up with a hard Brexit instead of a no-deal Brexit. It's not a great situation either way.
Thank you, Angus. I was thinking, before perhaps turning to rosary beads, well, there's obviously the UK Parliament. Now, we know it's been a bit quiet, or at least not as dramatic as maybe during the Article 50 process. But, what influence, if any, has the UK Parliament been able to exert during this phase of negotiations?
Well, prior to the 2019 election, the Christmas present election, as I call it, I was one of 20 MPs to oppose the election. I thought we had Boris Johnson in a cage. I said in Parliament, we have him in a cage, and we'd be wise to keep him in a cage. He's now got a majority of 80-90. So while there are things that in paper the UK Parliament can do, such as delay the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act for up to 21 days, we can't amend it if the government lays it down. There might be votes on it. It can be best, it can be a delay, but in reality, with an 80 majority, if you can keep the Brexiteer disparate coalition together and keep them on one vision, which it's a multiple vision ideal, he should have no problems at all getting whatever he wants through. We were in a very different situation before the election was gifted to Boris Johnson in the autumn last year, and we had him, as I say, in the cage, and might be in a different situation at the moment. But the way the electorate, and certainly in England, went, voting in a majority Conservative government and steamrolling over in the rest of the UK, means that Boris has a very free hand at the moment. And I just wonder, in Parliament, I can't see much on their way of stumbling blocks. I just wonder if the stumbling blocks will be the car parks in Kent and the car parks in Calais, if you like, if they can have car parks in Calais, and the checks in Dunkirk and other places for lorries. I do notice somebody's quipped that an Anglo-Saxon grave has been discovered, an ancient Anglo-Saxon grave has been discovered in Kent, which is delaying the construction of the car park. It's almost as if the German ancestors of the modern English have given them a warning from the past that Brexit is perhaps not a good idea. But maybe I'm clutching at straws there. I think I am.
I mean, I guess it's not really like Rome, where every time they try and extend the metro system, they discover some ruin. Here we obviously are up to a deadline, and there is
someone else said it was
1st of December.
If I can be allowed a sort of a dodgy cliche, that it was German planning about 900 years ahead to put a spanner in the works of Brexit by having an Anglo-Saxon grave where they put the car park. But I think maybe I think I should leave that where it is.
Yeah, we might come back to that one later. Thank you, Angus. Meredith, perhaps I can turn to you now. You've obviously been watching these negotiations very closely, and you've also been commenting on sort of the broader changes to the international trading system. In your view, looking at this negotiation, what are the main stumbling blocks?
So I think the main stumbling block is a very practical issue, has been over these level playing field issues. And so what these are is essentially regulation over the environment, labor markets, regulation and control of state aid, so government support for industry, and as well as some questions about taxation and what would be a fair taxation system. The basic problem that we have in this type of regime is the EU is a little bit reluctant to continue to give the British zero tariffs because they're afraid that after they do that, the British might engage in some kind of subsidy for British industry that would basically allow them to sell tons of stuff into the EU. At the same time, it would give British producers an unfair advantage relative to Europeans. And this goes both ways. And so within Europe, they have a lot of restrictions on government support for industry. And so I think within these, everything could be negotiated, but the one that's a real sticking block, I think, is this question of state aid. And, you know, I think Bernd very clearly explained, you know, there was a political declaration. I think some of the things that the EU was asking for in the official treaty text has to do with what do you do when you actually have a dispute. So whereas the political declaration is somewhat clear, the actual text of the treaty the EU is asking for is for quite stringent dispute settlement. They were involving the European Court of Justice. The UK, on the other hand, when they put forward their negotiating text, said we'd like a much more distant type of dispute settlement. We'd like specialized bodies set up for each individual dispute. In many cases, they said we don't want to dispute anything directly or litigate anything directly with the EU. When there's a problem, we want to go to the WTO. So there's some room there, I think, about how to resolve problems where I think the EU is probably willing to be a bit more flexible. But at a very deep level, I think the EU has a very important point to raise about state aid. And if you think about the European Union, with the UK as a member of the European Union, since 2004, they've been having fights over subsidies in commercial aircraft with the United States. So we're looking at 15 years of ongoing continual dispute over very important, technologically sophisticated industry. And so I think one of the things you can think about the EU's efforts in this whole state aid realm with the UK is to say, look, we want to go forward and not spend the next 20 years fighting over every single government policy like we have to do so much with the US. The very strange thing to me is this is a very reasonable position. In some sense, at a minimum, the EU is just saying to the UK, what is your plan for state aid and government support of industry? Can you just lay out a plan? And if you think traditionally about the United Kingdom, it's a country that's very supportive of open markets. You know, since Margaret Thatcher, there really hasn't been a very activist government role in industry. So if you think about that as the modern tradition of UK government intervention into markets, you think, well, why doesn't the UK just say, okay, we're a free market economy, we don't want a lot of government support for industry? But so this suggests, the very fact that they won't say that suggests that they have some kind of plan. They've had 4 years since Brexit to lay out what their own vision for the economy should be in the future. If they could state clearly what they're after, then you could begin to negotiate, as other countries around the world do over these state aid rules. The UK has said they want to stick with the WTO rules regarding state support for industry. Those are super weak rules. We already know they don't work in other parts of the world. So I would say that's not a great starting point for negotiation.
Thank you, Meredith. And I think that's an excellent point, that actually in a no deal sort of outcome, there aren't actually, there for a lot of areas and a lot of bits of the sector and trade, there are no international agreements to fall back on. And so there is a question of how you manage that, and something certainly I'd like to come back to. You touched on this in your remarks, but does this outcome of these negotiations, do you think it matters for the broader trading context? So you said, you know, both the EU and the UK are promoting sort of free trade, want to promote the virtues of free trade. If there's a no agreement outcome, what does that do to their credibility? Does it matter?
I think the damage, if there's a no deal, will fall more heavily on the UK in terms of reputation, because I think the EU has had a long history of having a very clear agenda for what it wants in the trading realm. And so I don't think that will hamper the EU's ability to go forward. I think one of the stated goals of the UK in a post-Brexit world has been they want to go ahead and negotiate further free trade agreements with other partners, like the US or like Japan. And Angus already explained the government's own assessments of the best case scenario of these future trade deals is very small. So the gain to the UK economy, while they are positive, they're really minuscule compared to any gains to be had from a negotiation and a successful agreement with the EU. But outside of that, even those very small gains, it's going to be very difficult for the UK to go forward and negotiate a bilateral free trade agreement with other countries when they don't have a clear and strong relationship with trade with the EU. because the reality is that businesses are worried about costs. Costs of trading with countries that are close to you are relatively low. If the UK can't produce and export to Europe, it's much less attractive as a location for investment with other foreign trading partners. It's much less attractive as a direct trading partner. A lot of, if you think about Japan, a lot of Japanese FDI is housed in the UK, where a large amount of the automobiles sector production in the UK is then exported to Europe. So I think the negative reputation costs for the UK are much more severe than they will be for the European Union.
Great, thank you, Meredith, and a lot to chew on there. We have about 15 minutes before I open up for questions from our audience, although do keep them coming, there are some great ones. I was wondering if we could sort of touch briefly on timing again, and then some technical points, and then maybe some process-related points. I will pick one question that came in from Jennifer Ranking from The Guardian, which is the question that I wanted to pose to all of you, but perhaps in particular Bernd and Angus. How important is next week's round? If there's no agreement by this round, can talks be rescued? And when is the point when an agreement actually becomes impossible to reach for lack of time? When is that deadline? When is it, that both sides should say, do you know what, we're not going to reach an agreement and let's just focus on no deal preparation?
Can you repeat? It was really complicated to hear you, huh?
So, Bernd, I was saying, what happens if next week the negotiations fail? When is the last possible point for negotiations to continue? When is it a point when the EU just says, do you know what, we'll walk away?
So, as I mentioned in my introduction remark to your question, for us, the Parliament is a deadline, the 31st of October. The text has to be ready. Otherwise, we have no chance to go into the ratification process. So next week is starting at the 8th of September. Probably we will have a second negotiation round in October. But it's really a tough timetable. And I don't expect that it's really possible. But it is also linked a bit to the negotiation tactic of the UK government. They are trying to deal at the moment only with the easy bits on goods, on qualification issues and some other items. The real hard one, as Merit just told us, the question of the level playing field, the alignment in labor rights, environment standards, and taxation and state aid, they won't deal with this at the moment. And secondly, we need dispute settlement and a horizontal kind of governance. And also this item is not on the agenda of the UK negotiation team at the moment. Boris Johnson mentioned 3 red lines for him in the negotiation. This is fishery has to be really different as before, no decision of the European Court of Justice, and no alignment with European legislation. We try to go ahead with these red lines in the negotiation. But on the other side, the UK government was not really able or ready or willing to go to our red lines, the level playing field and the governance structure. So I think they can have a deal on the complicated issue in a night at the end of October. I think this is not possible for such a complex issue like a comprehensive trade agreement. And we are preparing now for a no-deal situation. This will lead to some complicated issue at the border. We heard about that, the control system and certification, recognition, and. But nevertheless, it is important for the people and for the economy to know what it means if there is no comprehensive deal possible. And it's really crucial the next week and perhaps a little bit in September, but October is the red line.
So we can expect then more talk of no deal preparation then if talks next week don't ultimately lead to a big stepping stone?
Indeed, we have a communication to the public. We have around about 200 fact sheets to different sectors of the economy. And of course, the preparation in the member states, in the customs authorities is going on. We will see if in the context of the negotiations, some practical arrangements are possible. But nevertheless, our common goal is to have a comprehensive trade deal with no tariffs and no quotas. And until the last moment, we will stick to this common goal. And perhaps the last moment will be end of September.
Great. So still the ambition to reach a deal, but might have to beef up the no deal preparation. Angus, perhaps I can turn to you. How worried are you about a no deal outcome? And do you think businesses, citizens, and actually government are prepared for it?
I mean, I think businesses took themselves and filled up the warehouses and got their adrenaline rush going for the March 2019 possible Brexit departure, and that was averted. And I think it's kind of hard for people to do the same level of adrenaline on another occasion. And I think people have got the COVID stuff has come to the horizon as well. So I think the engagement is maybe not there that actually needs to be there. I suppose one of the things we should remember that this is a trade negotiation about downgrading your trading relationship. The best possible trading relationship you can have is an open market and no borders. I mean, Liverpool and Manchester, for instance, don't particularly want to put borders up between their two cities. So the UK is choosing to worsen its trading relationship with the European Union. As a result of that choice, there are difficulties being thrown up. The UK entered the transition period on the 31st of January. Apparently, the deadline for extending the transition period is passed. And one of the things I used to say at the beginning of this was a transition period we need 200 to 300 years, not 2 to 3 years, but 100 years for this complications to be sorted out. So there's a level of complexity here I don't think we're fully grasping or we're fully taking seriously. And I do wonder that if we either go for a new relationship, that'll be a downgraded new relationship and with possible border frictions and delays, or even worse, a no-deal scenario. How long will it last? You know, will the UK be back in emergency measures in 3 weeks, 4 weeks later? I don't know. It's a possibility because I don't think we fully understand what it is that's coming your way. We certainly didn't. Our minds didn't see the black swan event that was COVID-19, and I think this is something else that we just haven't comprehended properly. What is going to be coming your way, and this is something of our choice as well, which makes the car crash even slower. But since my first meetings doing this job as chair of international trade at the House of Commons, it's been very clear to me, talking to all areas of business from aviation to car manufacturing to ceramics, whatever, that there's nobody with good news. Nobody. I start all my meetings with all the sectors. Tell me the good news about Brexit, and you know it's been. Over the last 2 to 3 years, it's been a 30-second conversation, bar I should say Tate and Lyle Sugar. But everybody else all over the economy doesn't see a single benefit to this. They just see damage and mitigation. And they did get themselves into some sort of mitigation from March 2019, which was going to only mitigate the damage till about June 2019. For the best of 6 weeks of stock was what a lot of people were talking about. And the hope that something would arrive. Now, warehouses will not be available running up to the end of December. Warehouses are traditionally quite full then. So what I wonder is just what will happen when the car crash happens on the 1st of January onwards. Because there's no way that you can see that this is going to have a good outcome. I mean, we can be as optimistic as we want. We can talks of deals and whatever, but we are downgrading a relationship. And if you do downgrade, basically, I've said before, it's like driving a Rolls Royce and you crash the Rolls Royce, and the UK is now heading down the second-hand car showroom for the best second-hand car available. And that's what we're saying when we're talking about the best trade deal available. It is a lot worse than being in the single market and the customs union, where the UK was and where all the sensible countries are staying. Ireland, the Baltics, everybody wants to be in that club just about. And those that are not in it, actually many of them do wish they were in it. I'm thinking of Iceland and Norway, but for particular idiosyncratic reasons, they're not, but are quite closely aligned still. So it's not good news for me. I'm sorry. Don't get too depressed, folks.
No, we'll probably come back, I'm sure, in the question and answer session with the audience as well about, you know, some of the opportunities perhaps of Brexit as well. Meredith, Angus touched on this, but obviously another big aspect of this negotiation is making sure that businesses and people are ready for whatever change comes on the 1st of January 2021. You know, how confident are you that they are ready? And, you know, given COVID, given that capacity and resources are really stretched at the moment for many small and medium enterprises, is an implementation phase, an adaptation phase now inevitable in your view, and will it fly politically?
So I think trying to extend this implementation phase to a longer time period would be very sensible. And I think the businesses that would have the best benefit from this would be small and medium-sized enterprises. So one thing we know about international trade in general is for any country in the world, the vast majority of traded value is conducted by very large multinational corporations that sell in many different markets. And so this is the same for the UK. So the biggest firms in the UK trade with the United States, they trade with China, they trade with the European Union. So for them, Brexit and all of the additional cost of filing customs firms now for trade with Germany, having to pay additional costs in these areas, it's a cost. It will reduce their profitability, reduce their business activity, but it won't destroy them because they are efficient and they have an infrastructure to do this already, and they always have. The government has now had more time to set up its systems, so they might not be a complete car crash. But I think my biggest concern is really for, you know, somewhere around 140,000 smaller businesses in the UK that have only traded with the EU. They don't trade with third countries. For these firms, the bigger ones that maybe are a little bit more active have gone out and started to set up for all of this new customs filing. If the EU is a very important firm for them, they're going to be having all these processes in place. So again, this is costly, but they'll probably survive. But there's another range of firms for whom they are in the worst economic recession in over 100 years. And now on top of this, you're going to tell them, you know, as are their big trading partners in France and Spain. So you're going to say, okay, well, your customers in foreign markets are going through a recession. They might not be able to buy from you, but if you want to keep that market alive, you're going to have to start paying more to reach them. And so I think that the real cost of Brexit is going to be, it's not going to be a dramatic car crash, but it's going to be this slow drip of water on stone that crushes and kills all of these small and medium businesses. You know, and so we already have in the UK a real concern expressed by high-level ministers about the hollowing out of cities as people are working from home. So that's destroying this retail and service industry of small businesses. Now you're going to tell all of these, you know, manufacturing firms or firms that engage in selling services remotely with Europe, we're going to raise your costs in the middle of the worst recession in 100 years, and we're going to hope for the best that you guys manage to get through it. So it's very difficult. I think if we raise tariffs on trade with Europe because we can't get a deal, it's even worse. And so I really think and hope that there's a willingness to try to think about, you know, these important business owners and the people who work for them and trying to really smooth this out so that this can happen productively. And I think, you know, as discouraging as everything is, you know, in the weeks running up to the, you know, deadlines about the withdrawal agreement, it looked pretty grim. And ultimately, you know, what needed to happen was, nobody likes to say this very overtly, but there needed to be a decision that there would be a border in the Irish Sea. And, you know, for the Northern Irish, this, you know, is a very mixed blessing. On the one hand, they'll be able to retain tight relations with Europe and Ireland, but it is going to distance them from the rest of the UK. You know, but we need that moment to happen now so that there is some time and there can be some real sympathy from the government, from workers and firms who are facing these rising costs. At the very least, we can try to get a deal to minimize this by, making sure tariffs won't happen. And, you speak to people about sanitary, phytosanitary agreements. It's very difficult to sell fresh produce to the United States. It takes a long time to get this paperwork passed. And now we want to cut off those food links with, continental Europe. It would be really devastating to it's not a huge sector, but a lot of people work in these areas.
Fascinating. Very quickly before I turn sort of to some of the kind of known sticking points in this negotiation, Meredith, to you perhaps. We talk a lot about goods, but we don't necessarily talk about services, although services is obviously a very big part of our economy. Should we be worried about a no deal for services? And if I may just tag on, are there some sectors or industries that might benefit from a no deal as well? Because we talk obviously about supply chains and resilience, but are there any opportunities from that as well?
So on the services point, I'll just say that, I think overall it's negative. Brexit is negative for services. I think, for individual firms that are located in the UK, if you were providing a service in the European Union and you were selling them remotely from the UK, at this point, you've already established the subsidiary within the EU. And so now, in some sense, the tax base for that service has left the UK already, and it's now in the EU. So I think there's that. Continued sale of services across borders, that's one of the ones the UK has not been pushing as much. They're trying to hold back on negotiating that one. So in some sense, the drama around services is going to be less severe because you could have already made the move to set up your subsidiary. The quieter thing is the gradual erosion of the UK tax base and the loss of that economic activity. So that, and then the bright sides, the fundamental thing with Brexit. So where could there be a bright side? Potentially, there are some areas where EU regulation wasn't fit for purpose in the UK, and that there's a chance to change some of that. For example, there's always been criticism, since the 60s, since before Britain joined the EU, over areas like common agricultural policy. So maybe there's a new way to conceptualize the use of rural land and to maximize its value. So maybe there's some space there. Whether you could have done that before leaving the EU, maybe you could have in some areas. But I mean, fundamentally, you're raising costs on transactions. And so you're shrinking the size of your market. And so it's really hard to think about where is the benefit to come. I mean, one of the points that people have made on the side of those who supported Brexit is they said, well, growth of UK trade to the EU has been, of goods has been relatively modest over the past, 10 years, 1.5%. Growth to China has been, 11%. But realistically, if we look at the pound sterling value of increased trade between the UK and Europe over the last 10 years, it's been larger than the, pound sterling value of the growth of trade to China. It's just, we trade so little with China, a small increase looks like a huge growth rate. We trade so much with Europe, very huge increases come off as small growth rates. So it's hard to see where the silver lining is here. I think that's maybe a little bit more creativity feasible in domestic policy, but it's hard to see the real benefits.
Great, thank you, Meredith. I'm going to pick up on some of the dig deeper in some of the specific areas. We received a question from Christian Hetzner, who's from Automotive News, and perhaps this is one for you, Bernd. Road vehicles represent the second biggest goods export from the UK to the EU, worth approximately £17.3 billion. Given the considerable value, as well as all the jobs connected in this sector, could we see a separate mini deal negotiated on automotive and manufacturing in the event of no deal?
I don't think so, because there is a clear link between market access and standards. just looking on some sectorial areas is not sufficient, because we need, of course, guarantee that we will have a level playing field in competition. And the question of automotive sector is, of course, an important one. Also for my home constituency, Lower Saxony, we export a lot automotive cars and parts to the United Kingdom. But of course, this is also linked to services. This is linked to supply chain, and I can't see that it's possible to isolate such a sector. No, we need to have a more comprehensive approach to secure all the conditions for trade goods and services.
Great, thank you, Ben. Angus, we got a question specifically looking at financial services from David Harley, who used to be the ex-Deputy Secretary General of the European Parliament. What will the consequences for financial services be in the case of no deal or a hard Brexit? Does it make a difference, do you think?
I mean, I think, just to rewind on that a wee bit, I mean, I think if we have no deal, and maybe Bernd would be better on this, but I think I've got a feeling the negotiations will sort of continue. I think the cold January of no deal would sort of be a spur on for the UK to move on to have a deal. And, you know, I saw a question there from Andy Pye, just let the catastrophe happen. And, you know, it could be a change of administration. And, you know, a week can be a long time in politics, but when you bring on a calamity such as Brexit, 3 weeks might be a very long time in politics. Things might change quite remarkably. Who knows? But in financial services, I don't think no deal wouldn't be good at all. There'll be loads of areas where there will be no agreement. It'll be difficult. But I think, as Meredith probably said, many have seen this possibility coming and have probably moved already and thought of Dublin, which, as a Scottish nationalist, I see the clear advantages of Ireland being independent and able to choose its own course and stay inside the European Union. But is there anything good coming out of this at all? I mean, nobody in services comes to me and says, let's get Brexit or the advantages of this at all. It's clearly seen as being a negative all over the place, and the specifics of the negative vary from point to point of what particular service you're engaged in. And as Bernd says, the areas of the level playing field and standards and the rest of it has a huge impact to play in the export of services too. So if we don't have agreement in those, it surely follows that services are going to be impacted. There is nothing good coming out of this as far as I can see, and I think that if I didn't have my political hat on, and if I was one of the people from industry or somebody from, let's say, Canada or Japan or Australia, and just fairly looking at the pros and cons, you wouldn't be doing this carry on at all. But we are doing it, and I don't think that those in charge fully realise what they're doing, and that is difficult for us to believe. But I think we've got an example in COVID as well. They just didn't get a grip of what was happening, and probably the indicators in COVID were maybe more or less obvious. But anyway, they weren't picked up. And I don't think they're picking up Brexit either. And I think that in 3 to 4 months, looking back at this period, we'll think, how the heck did that happen? How weren't those decisions made differently? How weren't things averted? But and I think the things that'll create the problems are going to be the supermarket shelves. And we've already touched on the toilet paper fiasco of COVID, but I think that's going to be a lot worse across the piece. And I'm sorry, it's probably not the answer that's been looked for by David Harley on financial services, but it is so vast and all over the place, but I can't see it being good.
Meredith, I'm sure you've got sort of something that you might want to add to that, but just we got a question from Nandini who said, you know, what happens about data sharing in this situation? Is that something that the businesses should be concerned about?
So I'm not an expert on the data rules, but I think this is one of the more complex and problematic areas because if we don't have full participation in the European data sharing rules, this can be a real problem for some businesses that rely on data. So we need to have so I guess there's this issue of, can we have some sort of smaller side agreements put in place along the lines of some of the agreements, say, that the EU has with the United States? And I think that for something like data sharing, this is maybe one of the things that the UK needs to unilaterally kind of show some conformity with EU rules just to keep that going. But I think that could be quite I mean, my impression is that that area is quite problematic. It's also interesting. I mean, there's rules about data sharing on the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, right, that are very strong against data localization policy. So there's a very strong, the UK has expressed an interest in wanting to go forward and think about joining that agreement, but they have some strong rules trying to keep data flows quite free under the influence of the United States, that was originally one of the countries developing that treaty. In the EU, there's a much stronger concern about individual privacy and protecting the individual's rights and the individual's rights to have private data. So the data protections are much stronger. So this kind of leaves the UK in sort of a bind here. They need to figure out what they want to do with data sharing. And if they want to keep their trade and some various services aspects alive with the EU, they're going to basically have to sign on to what the EU is asking.
Meredith, we have
in many areas it could be frozen out overnight if there's a no deal. I think Bernd should. Sorry, Georgina.
No, not at all. We have quite a few questions on
the last minutes. We raised a fundamental problem: the problem of the request of the United Kingdom on market access, on financial services, on data, and on lorry trafficking and so on. But on the other side, not willing to accept common standards. On data, for example, they made a proposal on data flow, but not respecting the data protection regulation for personal data, which is at the moment valid even in the United Kingdom. They want to have a negotiation about equivalency, and this is not acceptable. We have it the same with financial services. They want to have national treatment and not a clear common ruling about problems in financial services as we have it now. So we have to really find a solution for this position of the United Kingdom, not willing to accept any common rules and not any common governing structures. And if this is not the case, it is really complicated to give really market access for goods and for services.
And on that point as well, I mean, I think when the UK was talking a few months ago about sort of small mini deals, that was the point where the then Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, said, yeah, we're not going to negotiate. There's things you want that you think are easy to negotiate. They're the difficult things for us to yield. And the things that we want, that we think are easy, are the things that are difficult for you to yield. And that's why I think it mitigates against a seductive idea of sectoral breaks, but for the reasons that Bernd has laid out there, as well as the fact that you want to use in a negotiation your difficulties or their difficulties, one against the other, so you come to some sort of compromise. But the current demands, as Bernd has laid out, are working against that.
On that point, Bernd, one of the criticisms that you hear in British press from the UK side has been that the EU has refused to make progress because of this parallelism, i.e. we can only move forward if we've made progress across all areas. Do you not think this is holding back negotiations and the possibility of reaching a compromise?
Of course, I believe in miracle, so that's for sure. So let's see if there is a change in the tactic of the UK government. As I mentioned before, my impression is they want to have really the big items on the night before the end of the day. And this is not possible. And I hope we can really convince the UK government to switch this tactic to negotiation in parallel in all items on the table. And then the possibility of a deal is there. So it's really, the ball is in the field of the UK government, I guess.
And very quickly on that, what are the particular areas that you would hope the government would make, suggestions and proposals? We heard Michel Barnier yesterday saying there are some areas where we're still waiting on UK proposals. What are those areas?
Yeah, the crucial items are there. So perhaps there's a small movement in the tactic of the UK government. We always discuss a non-regression clause so that there should be no ways going behind the standards and the situation we have. At the beginning of the negotiation, this non-regression clause was also not in the focus of the British government and was not taken on the negotiation table by the government. This has changed. And perhaps we will see in the other items which are important for the European Union, this might be also the case. But it's in the air. I have no clue how the government will decide.
Great, thank you very much for that. Let's turn to basic deal, no deal questions. And Meredith, maybe I could start with you. Is there a difference between a basic deal / hard Brexit and a no deal Brexit? And if we do reach a deal at the end of the year, is that the end of negotiations in your view, or does a basic deal mean that actually we're open to forever talks with our EU partners?
So I think I'll take the easy one first. Yes, the UK is going to be negotiating with the EU forever. There will be breaks, but essentially it's such an important trading partner that it's very likely that there will be periods of negotiation and then things will pause and then there will be periods of renegotiation. The difference, what defines a deal, you get to choose what you want to put in it. I think the EU has somewhat sensibly said, they're a little flexible around this, but they say there are some minimum things they need, right? If you're going to have no tariffs, we're going to have some understanding of what the regulatory policies are going to be in the United Kingdom. And you're not going to be able to offer no tariffs without some at least clarity about transparency of what's going to be happening. So I think, my impression though is a basic deal that covers very limited things like some limited commitments to state aid in exchange for free tariffs, that is better than no deal. And having, in some sense, the first step is just setting up the structure. If you look at other trade deals over time, both parties learn what's going on, right? So they learn what are the needs of business and they learn what things are working and don't work. And so then, sometimes immediately after a negotiation is, fully implemented, you see the two sides coming together and saying, here's a new issue that didn't exist before and we need to start renegotiating. Or we negotiated something, we now realize it's adverse for our economy and we need to change things a bit in some way. So I think this is going to be an ongoing relationship. I also think that goods trade is a smaller and smaller share, it's a fact, it's a smaller and smaller share of the overall economy. And so one can see in the future greater interest in negotiating deeper deals over, trade and services. Another issue that comes up, not just in the context of the UK and the EU, has to do with fair tax treatment. And this is a big issue that's within the EU. It's also a big issue with the OECD, in that as we have new technologies and new sort of, types of services we purchase, so services from Google, Facebook, Apple, the question is, where should we be taxing those things? That comes under various questions of how we should structure taxation, fair taxation, what areas of, should investment in this type of taxation agreement be included in a trade deal or not? So even after a basic deal is set, there's still many, many issues that the governments will need to address in order to, enhance the well-being of their citizens. That's ultimately what they want to do, so they're going to have to keep talking.
Brexit, the gift that keeps on giving, the analysts and politicians involved. We had a question from Femi on sort of, hard Brexit could potentially mean negotiating tariffs sector by sector. Do we even have time for that? Or are we sort of basically heading for no deal by default? Maybe Angus, do you want to pick that one up first and I'll turn to Bernd?
Well, I think no deal will defer to our WTO tariff schedules, which have been lodged, and the European Union has those. The UK's had those in at the WTO as well. So once if it's a no deal scenario, everybody you will get the EU will be treating the UK as they do countries from starting the beginning of the alphabet, Afghanistan to the end Zimbabwe, which they have no deals with. So there's a schedule there is written. It's quite straightforward stuff. They've got to do the MFN tariffs, and everybody gets treated the same. So that's not a pretty scenario at all. And the UK will have its tariffs, and of course, you might say, well, let's get rid of tariffs, and we can be as we are. But of course, if you get rid of your tariffs, you then lost negotiating arm further down the line, and you expose your industries to imports willy-nilly from anywhere. So we're walking into another minefield around this. I suppose Bernd can throw some more fuel on this fire if he chooses, but it's not great.
I guess the question here, Bernd, was really about as well, sort of if both sides agree that quota-free, tariff-free isn't possible, and that we have to negotiate line by line, is that even possible? Is that something that EU's ready to do in the next couple of weeks?
It will be complicated, and of course we have some further things to reflect on negotiation on tariffs. So first of all, it's clear in the frame of the WTO and the World Trade Organization that a trade deal has to cover up to 70–80% of tariffs going in the direction of zero. Otherwise, it is not allowed to negotiate in a specific way, because then, of course, you will discriminate other trading partners. So this we have to have in mind. And secondly, tariffs are one side of the coin. The other side are the rules of origin. For example, the Mini Cooper produced in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, is of course produced there, but nobody knows exactly what the added value in the United Kingdom is. Is it 40%, 30%, 50%? And this is of course relevant to identify a product as a British product and give them preferences for the customs code. So both sides of the coin have to be negotiated. And then coming to your question, this is really complicated. If you really want to do it sector by sector, good by good, this takes a long time, and this is definitely not possible in 1 month.
And Bernd raises a good point there about the 70–80%. So it might be seductive to have a deal, I don't know, on let's say tires, but you can't have a deal on tires, because you have to have, if you have a deal with one person on tires, you will have objections raised in the WTO that you're discriminating against other countries that don't have the deal on tires. On the Mini Cooper one, I think that's a great example. I understand there's something like about 25–30% is the best from chat in automotive. If anybody watching who wants to correct me, please do. But I understand that the best of UK content that they can manage in cars is about 25–30%. Now, for instance, exporting cars to somewhere like South Korea requires a 55% content to qualify for no tariff. So even in this situation where the UK rolls over the Korea deal word for word, you still can't use that because you can't reach the 55%. And this was something that the former Secretary of State of the Department of International Trade, appearing in our committee, didn't appear to know early on in the time of Brexit, around probably 2017, or maybe it was 2016. And and the learning that's been going on is something else, not just outside government, but I would guess inside government is quite amazing too. The one thing I will say about Brexit, I don't know if it's shared by other colleagues on the panel here, is I know more about, I've been saying this for about 2 years, I know more about Brexit this month than I knew last month, and I'll know more next month than I know this month. And I'm going to guess that all of us are going to know a damn sight more about Brexit come January, if there's no deal, than we do sitting here on the 3rd of September.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid point. It's obviously so complex and it's very difficult for you know, even constituents, I can imagine for you, Angus, raising particular points. We've had a couple of questions on just sort of the supply chain, and then I will turn to more the political angle, which is obviously going to, you know, be the key question about whether or not a deal can be achieved. But just before I do, on the supply chains, Meredith perhaps or Bernd, you know, medical supplies, access to medical supplies, global pandemics, you know, in a no-deal scenario, how could the UK and the EU work together to ensure that at least those supply chains are as protected as possible?
I have really a problem to hear you, probably.
Well, I'll ask Meredith to come in first, and then maybe you can pick up after. But Meredith, do you want to come in?
Well, so specifically for COVID, there are some specific initiatives, like there's a global vaccine initiative that's, you know, asking all countries to sign on to an agreement that if a vaccine is discovered, we're going to distribute it equitably and, you know, according to need and things like this. And my understanding is the EU is not on board with this, the US. So the big rich parts of the world, if they get a vaccine, want to use it for their constituents, not for people in other parts of the world. So that's a problem. More narrowly, I don't know exactly what the situation is with medicines in the event of a no deal, but I think that in the run up to our previous no deals, there was a lot of work done to ensure that life-saving perishable medicines, you know, so medicines that have biological components would be prioritized in any trade. And so I think, you know, this is more concern for the UK potentially than Europe. But I think at the, you know, there's some rationality to government, and where there's a clear human need, I think there will be some prioritization for things like clinical medical trials. There's often, you know, you enroll participants globally for, you know, rare disease if necessary. So that's not my, I guess that's not my first order concern at the moment, because I think that in some sense, government is most responsive to what it perceives as the most vital and necessary needs. And so medicine, I think, does get some extra attention there.
Thank you. I can't believe we've had 1 hour and this is me, of course, not brought up the issue of fisheries. So I'm going to ask our two politicians about fisheries. Bernd, maybe starting with you. The two sides are obviously very far apart in what they would like for a fisheries agreement. Do you sense any appetite at all for the EU to move on fish?
Perhaps one remark on the medicine. I think it's a serious situation because we have really an integrated market in the production of medicine, pharmaceuticals, and the crucial item is the recognition of certification. A lot of medicine produced in UK are sold in the European Union, and I hope that we can manage the recognition of the certification process, the clinical trials, and that there are no problems because the medicine is needed in the European Union, where there was in some other products. But it's really depending on the result of the negotiation process. On fishery, yeah. As I mentioned before, this is one of the crucial 3 elements Boris Johnson mentioned to us. He wants to fundamental change to the situation as it is. The fundamental situation is that European fishermen and fisherwomen are fishing in the European waters, and this means also in the British waters. And the logical consequences of Brexit would be to divide the quotas the European Union is allowed to fish. But the understanding of the British government is quite different. They want to discuss fish by fish. So for around about 100 different kind of fish, different quotas, and they want to exclude a coastal zone from about 6 to 12 miles from the British coast. So it's a quite different system. And there is at the moment no progress at all to go for a compromise. And it's also for both sides, I think, not practical to discuss year by year the quotas for more than 100 kinds of fish. So we have to discuss on the division of quotas, and we have also to discuss the international situation of fishing, because we want to stop the overfishing on a global level, and therefore we have to arrange a quota system between the British government and the European Union on a global level as well, and to our Norwegian partners, where we have at the moment common quotas with the Norwegian government as well. We want to divide this quota between United Kingdom and the European Union, and the United Kingdom wants to have own negotiations with Norway. So a lot of different approaches in this fishery discussion, and I see no solution at the moment, to be honest.
That's not very encouraging. Angus, I can imagine this is an issue that comes in your inbox quite a lot, given your sort of constituency and the importance of the fishing industry for Scotland. What's your view? Can we reach an agreement on this?
And desperate as I am to bite on that fishing hook, just for a moment, I'm going to do what Bernd did and mention the medicine as well, because on the medical side, one of the things we saw, and I've plugged the report from the House of Commons International Trade Committee recently, the 23rd of July, of COVID and the COVID pandemic and international trade. One of the things we saw there was unusually not tariffs and delays and stopping of exports was stopping of imports, was stopping of exports. And I think countries are trying to get together to promise that they won't stop sending stuff around the place, which is leaving every other country jittery if one country's holding their supplies and not allowing trade to flow. I think everybody's come to the view that they're better to let trade to flow. The other side of it, of course, is licensing. Pharmaceutical companies, or amongst others of the companies who come to see me with their head in their hands, where they normally spend the time worrying and thinking about cancer drugs, have spent a lot of time now thinking about Brexit. They say licensing is going to be an issue for the UK, because the markets to get licenses in will be the USA first, and then the European Union market, which would then have included the UK, but might not in the future, and that will be a difficulty and maybe delay in medicines coming into the UK. Over to the fishing. Well, where do we start on the fishing? This is great fun. The fishing. I have fished a couple of times myself. I've been in a lobster boat and a static line boat, static net boat in the past. My daughter this afternoon is working in a fish factory here during her summer student vacation before she returns to university next week. So fishing is multi-headed here, and one of the things I do note amongst some of my, and I mentioned this in the preamble earlier, I've got a cousin who's managing the fish factory my daughter's working in. I live in an island of about 1,200. There's about 40, 50 people working in the fish factory. It is substantial, but it's selling the fish and 90% of the product probably into the European Union market. The boats we have will not go out to Rockall. They will not go 200 miles. They are usually fishing in the 12-mile zone, which are the Minches, between the Outer Hebrides and the Scottish mainland. The lobster boats are closer to the rocks even. They're probably only going 4 or 5 miles out. And they themselves are sending stuff to the French and Spanish markets. So while some of the people, and my cousin might, whether he likes it or not, I know he's a Brexiteer, despite his reliance on the European market, it's something I haven't quite got to the bottom of the understanding of that after 4 or 5 years. But within the UK, I think it's maybe no surprise that there's a tension with fishing. I mean, if we're going to be taking back fishing rights from other people, firstly, we should remember we don't have the fishing capacity to catch this. This is something that the Scottish Fishermen's Federation have said. We don't have the boats to go there. Certainly the boats around my island, as I've probably been saying, aren't trawlers the size you'll see in the Faroe Islands at all. They're a lot smaller. So we personally can't get out. The next thing is, if we are, let's go down the scenario and we're taking the fishing quotas away from people like Bernd. Has Bernd historically inherited those from historical patterns in fishing? Has he bought the quota? If he's bought the quota and I've then gone off and bought a villa in Spain, but I'm taking the quota of Bernd, can Bernd then come and take my villa in Spain away from me? This is something I'm not sure about. But also, at a political level, there's a battle in the UK that we don't want. If this is coming to the UK, we certainly don't want London managing it from 12 to 200 miles. We want to be doing this within Scotland. Within Scotland, of course, there are vested interests who are looking to grab this for themselves. On the West Coast Islands here, I'd be looking, if we are getting this, to replicate what the Faroe Islands have been doing, a population of 52,000 controlling 200-mile zone all around them. The only 200-mile zone the UK's got are west of my constituency here, west of the Outer Hebrides. So I'd be looking not for that to be going to the east coast of Scotland. I'd be looking for that to be coming to the west coast and any benefits to ourselves. And the point of bringing up all that detail is just to show how multi-layered and how big the argument is for what is 0.1% of UK GDP, UK GDP. But it's about 10 to 15 times bigger than Scotland. It's a lot bigger for Scotland. But again, for us on the islands, it's bigger still. But it's hugely iconic, hugely complicated. And there's an awful lot involved with this because the Brexiteers have somehow, some of them have never stepped in a fishing boat. They probably don't know which direction the fish swims in unless they've had goldfish in the past. But they've put their coat on this hook an awful lot. I mean, the coat hook, no, not the fish hook, but I think it's maybe found it's a fish hook and it's impaled them. And it's a huge difficulty for them to get through this. Remember, the Conservatives in the 70s, the UK government sold out fishing, as we put it, because they wanted some other gains. It's not impossible to do the same again. It is a small part of the UK economy, as I've said, and there are tensions around us as to what happens with the fisheries. If indeed, let's assume we could catch them all like the Faroese can, and we do invest, but that's a period of years. And the bigger risk for my fishermen is that they go bust in the meantime because they can't sell their catch that they're currently catching in the 12-mile limit, mostly into the European market. So the complications of fishing are huge.
Indeed, and there's a really close link between the whole discussion about fishery and the export of fish products to the European Union. So fishery and goods are totally linked. And of course, I'm totally convinced that the people in the United Kingdom are not able to consume all the fish caught in the British zone, and so much fish and chips are not able to consume even in Great Britain.
And in fact, it gets even more complicated. Most of the fish I don't know why this happens, most of the fish we're catching, we sell to the European continent, and most of the fish we're eating, apparently we're buying in from Iceland and the Faroe Islands.
Exactly.
I mean, but it is an area, and it always gets unstuck in trade, usually around the areas of agriculture and fisheries, because I suppose because agriculture, you can see, control large tracts of your landscape. They've got huge areas they're controlling. They can, as we've seen in Paris, drive in with trucks of manure and spray it all over the place, and fishermen can dump product that smells quite bad after a couple of days in the area. So perhaps there's some of that, but also people are quick to make promises to fisheries. Also, fisheries are something you can understand and visualize quite easily. You know, there's fish in the sea, you put it in a boat. It's easily seen, and we've seen the picture since primary school of that. So that's I am probably waffling on about fisheries, but I can go a lot more on fisheries, but I'm trying to do my best not to.
I mean, we could, but we have actually quite a few questions about people as well, and people mobility, which I do really want to try and squeeze in.
Yeah,
ask you all to be quite brief with your remarks. But just before I move on to the mobility question, and then finally sort of Parliament, Meredith, the government has done quite a lot now to, say that there will be change come the 1st of January. It's just launched a big campaign to get businesses and people ready for that change. In your view, is there anything else that the government could do? Because as Angus says, there are specific, lots of different sectors. They're very complicated. The consequences are complicated to understand. Is there, in your view, what would be your top tip to government right now in terms of preparing for whatever comes on the 1st of January?
My overall impression when speaking to business people is that there's still a sense that in many cases, the needs they have, the specific problems they have in their sector, when they know that there's a potential problem, they somehow have a hard time getting that fed into policy development. And so I think that that's one of the things that strikes me speaking to different businesses is that on the one hand, they don't quite know they have a problem or they anticipate a problem. They don't quite know how to communicate that into government. And so the policy development in some cases doesn't really seem to be focused around business needs. And I think this is one of the things that strikes me overall. We were talking about rules of origin earlier. If you think about what happened in the US, Mexico, Canada trade agreement, the US decided it wanted to have this progressive policy. And so specifically from the US perspective, they wanted to impose minimum wages in Mexico in the automobile sector. And so this is actually, real overreach of sovereignty and pushing Mexico into doing something. But the interesting thing was the Mexican government then queried its automobile producers and said, well, wait a second, is this feasible? Like, what level of wage are you currently paying? And if we were to implement this as a requirement in the USMCA, would this hurt you? And so then they were able to negotiate something where actually most Mexican firms were already paying US $16 an hour to their employees. So they were able to set this up. So I think one of the things is there's this, I think, really the government's talking about readiness. A real issue is how do they get that deep knowledge from business to be fed into the policy development process? So that's one thing. And then I think there's, the other thing you hear from smaller businesses is them just saying, I'm just going to throw my hands up. Like everything is so complicated. There is a lot of information on the website, but I think that this is still going to be difficult. And I think, if you look at COVID, businesses basically were shut down. And so people were scrambling to file all of their, support, requests for support from government, tax, support, loans, etc. I think with Brexit, I think there's still a sense that businesses are a little bit reluctant to engage because they're not quite sure what's going to happen. So I think Bernd has raised this issue of the government can't come in at the 11th hour and say, we've decided all of these important issues and now everything's done. At the same time, businesses don't really know. Again, they've continually had to invest in no deal. What are they going to do for no deal? Stockpiling. And I think there's a little bit of fatigue here. And so I think that what government really needs to do is come up with a plan and say, this is really what it is. And I think the waffling back and forth, I think it's harmful to UK businesses to continually delay these negotiations. So I'll stop there.
I have one sort of concluding question for you all, but just before I ask that one, there's a real concern in some of the questions that came up about mobility and enabling the UK to continue to access, obviously, the Erasmus programme, Erasmus for young entrepreneurs, but also being part of Horizon Europe, possibly, or associated status, to really enable researchers from both sides to continue working together and travelling to the EU and the UK. Bernd, how are those discussions going? And do you think there's scope for continued cooperation there?
Unfortunately, also not so fast and good as I wanted to see it. On mobility, yes, of course, we have at the moment a common market and therefore a lot of European citizens are working in the United Kingdom and vice versa. And of course, we want to secure the situation. Some elements are in the treaty and some others have to be integrated in a trade deal, specifically on the services side, the so-called Mode 4 elements. This is still open. I hope that we can manage to find a situation where it will be still possible to deliver services on each side of a channel. And secondly, yes, it's really important to have this network, this grassroots of mobility in the European programs, like the research program, the Horizon 2020, or the Erasmus for the youth. And there are negotiations going on, and I think if we can find an overall deal, then the participation of the United Kingdom in these programs are possible. At the moment, we are discussing a little bit the financial aspects of these programs, but it should be possible. It's totally clear. At the end of the day, with deal or no deal, Britain is still a part of Europe, and we should give the people of Europe the possibility to see and work wherever they want.
I have a question to you all now. We are obviously venturing very close to the 31st of December. In your view, will there be a deal? And how long really can negotiations go until? When is the last possible moment? Because Bernd, you said end of October, but could we give it a push? Could we go until mid-November? Angus, do you want to go first, perhaps?
Oh, I mean, this is the crystal ball game that if you watch this in 2 weeks' time, and you're either bang on or you're really wide, depending which way if you flip the coin in your head. I mean, what I would say, if there's going to be a deal, it ain't going to be half as good as the deal we've got. And we're back to the Rolls-Royce. We've crashed the Rolls-Royce, and we're down the second-hand car showroom at the moment. We're deciding, are we going to buy, what sort of second-hand car are we going to get? Are we going to get a reasonable second-hand car or the cheapest, rubbishiest car in the second-hand showroom? What are we going to go away with? Or are we just going to say we're not going to buy a second-hand car today and decide we'll become a pedestrian, and then we reach January and we decide we need to get a second-hand car and we're now back down the showroom because we need some form of transportation. So will there be a deal or will there not be a deal? You know, the thing is here, you're asking me to employ logic. Now, the first thing that's got out the window in the entire Brexit process is logic, because if you're using logic, you wouldn't be doing this damn silly idea in the first place. We are doing this damn silly idea. It's illogical, it's crazy, it's backwards, it's economically ruinous and damaging. Maybe not ruinous, certainly damaging. So logically, you would have a deal, but logic is nowhere to be seen in most of this process. So I haven't got a coin in my hand, but if I'm going, and somebody's got a coin, you go, heads, I've got a deal, tails, I've got no deal. There you go.
Right, so agnostic, I will say. Meredith, what's your view?
So I'm not willing to lay money on this either. Although I just want to emphasize, every day of delay is costly to businesses, right? So just another example, back before China joined the WTO, China had access to the U.S. market on WTO terms, which was quite generous. So they could sell a lot of stuff into the U.S. at very low tariffs. But because the U.S. was concerned about China's human rights record after the Tiananmen Square massacre, every year Congress would have to reauthorize continued openness of the U.S. market to China. And in response to that, there's been some interesting economic research that in the run-up to that congressional vote every year, there was a huge surge of imports from China as businesses stockpiled parts that they thought they might lose access to. So, you know, you can import that stuff, but then you have to store it. And storing it, all those spare parts, is costly. And so if we've gone through a couple of rounds of this already, it wasn't costless to keep, delaying. It was probably better to delay than, to just crash out without a deal. But this uncertainty is very costly for businesses, because then you have to plan what your plan B is, and developing and implementing a plan B is costly. And so I hope that there can be, fiscal prudence says, let's come up with a plan so that everyone can go forward into the future with some semblance of understanding what's going to happen, and keep costs down for businesses that want to try to make a profit.
A stay of execution is better than the actual execution, I think. It's well.
Yeah.
But listening to this conversation, it's clear that there will be, I think, a ramp up on both sides of planning for all eventualities, and so it will be something to watch. But the very last word to you before I wrap up.
So the really crucial question is if the British government is really want to have a deal or not. That's for me unclear. If we say yes and they want, everything is possible. But this if is not clear for me at the moment. And let's see if we can get clear signals from the British government, then of course a deal is possible. And I and the European Parliament is fighting for a deal.
Great. Well, thank you very much. There are lots of things we haven't covered. Northern Ireland, I know there are a couple of questions about devolved governments as well in these negotiations, and questions about future cooperation. I think what's clear from this conversation is that a deal might still be possible, but for compromise, it will require both sides to move. And in addition to that, a lot of planning for all eventualities and clear communication. My thanks to our panel today for their excellent insights, and to all of you for being here. And last but not least, thank you to the European Parliament Office in the UK for putting on this event. If you want to find out more about their events, check out their website and their social media feed. Have a lovely day and see you very soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.